Welcome to the Women's Sanctuary, the podcast about tending the soul of women, sisterhood, and the rise of the sacred feminine. I'm your host, Arlia Hoffman. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Women's Sanctuary. This is Arlia, and I have a gift for you today. I'll call it a gift. It's a conversation I've been thinking about for quite a while, and it popped up recently with an interaction on Facebook with my friend Julie Greenberg, and who's been a connection for years, and so I've watched her process, and so it felt like just the perfect time for a conversation. Julie and I both have experienced a challenging relationship with our fathers, and they have each since passed. And, as she has navigated that process, it has helped me reflect on my own. And so I'm hoping that today what our conversation will offer you is some insight into if you have had a difficult relationship with your father or a different family member or someone else in your life, how the arc of that relationship might unfold, and what happens when they pass. And it's an entire rainbow of experience and emotions. I know it was for me. And at the time that my father passed, I didn't have any context for that. I didn't have anybody else to look to help me understand what was happening. So I hope in that regard, this is helpful for you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Julie. Julie Greenberg is an intuitive lifestyle and wellness coach, empowering women to expand their sense of self-trust, personal satisfaction, and fulfillment. Within her unique hybrid practice, Nourish Nurture Nest, love that, Julie provides an integrated approach to holistic wellness through mind, body, and spirit connection. With her full presence, grace, and compassion, Julie offers her clients gentle guidance, inspiration, and tools and practices for making empowered choices so they feel more balanced and aligned with their core values and desires. Clients learn to connect with their true selves and cultivate loving relationships with their bodies using mindfulness practices, intuitive eating, and using wholesome, nutritious food as medicine, as well as prioritizing and maintaining beautiful, functional, inspired spaces as an integral aspect of their sacred soul care. There's so much alignment in the work we do. It's beautiful. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
I'm so happy to have you. We've known each other online for a number of years, and I think this is the first time we've chatted face to face, so I'm thrilled to have you.
Likewise. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So I don't even really know where to begin. So my father passed in 2017, and since then I have worked on that grief process. Give us some context for your relationship with your father growing up and how that impacted you.
Oh gosh,
It's a big one, I know.
Yeah. So
whatever feels, right for you to share.
Sure. So I grew up in Philadelphia, and my parents separated when I was 7 and divorced when I was 10. I am the only girl. I have 3 brothers, one older brother and 2 younger brothers who are twins. So I'm kind of like middle child, only girl, which definitely proved to be a tricky role in my family. And when my parents separated for a variety of reasons, the kids, my brothers and I, all continued living in the family home with my dad. And my mom moved out and had a little kind of funky apartment and was juggling lots of part-time jobs and just trying to navigate, being newly independent. But she was still very present in our lives. Um, and there was definitely a lot of drama and intense emotion swirling around in our home, resulting from their split. And I guess I've always been a highly sensitive little being, just felt a lot. My mom used to call me a universal empath.
Mm.
And it really wasn't until recently that I began to understand and really kind of embody and integrate what she meant by that, because it's very apparent that that's who I am. So, that being said, I think that as a little girl, I was really um, swept up in and deeply impacted by mostly my dad's big emotions, which ranged from probably grief
Mhm.
and anger around the loss or the end of their marriage. And what I understand now, I think what I felt then and understand now is like he projected a lot of his anger toward my mom, onto me because I was the most like her, being female and looking a lot like her. And I know now, of course, that he never meant to hurt me or do harm. Um, and I just didn't really have the tools. I wasn't equipped to know what to do with all of that, like displaced, misplaced emotion
Mhm.
that wasn't mine. Um, and so I guess that translated, part of how that translated is like I just really felt like I didn't belong in my family. I felt very other and othered.
Mhm.
Um, and I felt resented,
Mm.
and later came to recognize that I felt scapegoated. So there was always a sense of like, and I really have carried with me. In fact, my dad actually said the words to me. Well, what I was going to say is, I always felt like everything was my fault,
Mm.
and I now understand that. I mean, that I have a memory of coming home from a sleepover, when I was probably, I don't know, 8, um, and quickly getting embroiled in some conflict with one of my brothers, which turned into a conflict with all of my brothers. And my dad, I hear my dad's words saying, "Everything was fine until you came home." So that pierced deeply and stung hard and
Mhm.
stayed with me always.
Mhm.
So that's sort of, one example of like an undercurrent of the theme that, um,
That's really interesting. I'm going to jump in here and say I had a pretty devastating, traumatic moment with my father when I was 8.
mm,
Not sure I'm willing to go into the details, but well, I guess I will, because they're both gone. But he was delusional in thinking that my mother and sisters were going to die that day. And so he took me and I don't know, somewhere and told me they were gone. And of course, as an 8-year-old, you believe and you grieve and you react. And we got home about an hour later and they were there. Um, there was more to the circumstances, but that was enough. And I feel so much compassion for our young selves to, and any young person, navigating the emotional landscape of the people around them with no context. That's what we
your
spend the
share.
rest of our lives working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like unpacking that, trying to make sense of things that don't make sense.
Mhm.
Your share reminded me of another, um, kind of significant piece that I often don't remember or think about, but also age 8. I remember I was in second grade and I had this dream, and it was so vivid. My brothers and I were getting off the school bus at the end of our block, and our dad was there to greet us, which was not typical. And he greets us at the school bus and says, we're gonna go buy new shoes. So we're walking back to the house to prepare to go get new shoes. And as we turn to walk home in the dream, he gets shot. Somebody approaches and shoots my dad right in the chest, right in front of us. And so, of course, that was terrifying. Um, and really, all I remember is like waking from that dream with such a overwhelming sense of it being real, so
Mm,
much so that at breakfast that morning, I didn't register his presence. He was there. It was a normal day. We go to school, but I am just a puddle of tears and emotion and terror because I saw my dad get shot.
mm,
And I'm at school. I can't stop crying. I explain like my dad was shot. He's in the hospital. I don't know if he's gonna be okay. And I like created this whole story. And they
mm,
sent me to the office and they call my parents. My dad ran a school. My mom taught at the school. The school administrator calls my parents' school, speaks to my mom and says, is Arnold okay? And she said, yeah, he's fine. He's right here. And they explain that I'm telling this story. And I'm picked up at school, brought home. I miss a week of school. I'm just like so caught in this unreality.
mm,
Um, and it was really traumatic. And until I was probably about 11 or 12, I had like this patch of dry skin on my chest in the exact spot where he was
mm.
shot. So it's just a bizarrely intense memory and experience. And
Yeah,
I'm still not sure what it really signifies, but it was relevant in terms of your share about that
yeah, yeah,
dad's delusional state and
yeah.
how that impacted you.
Ooh, yeah. So, w- how did your relationship with your father evolve during adulthood?
Um, Complicated to say the least. Another quick thing I'll just share about childhood. When I was 10, right when my parents' divorce was finalized, my dad took my brothers and me on a cross country trip for 6 months, traveling around in a trailer. And I really didn't want to go. Uh, I just wanted to remain in Philadelphia, live with my mom, and just, not leave my friends. So that was difficult.
Hmm.
And so it was a long 6 months. And I was not happy during that time. I look back now, of course, and I really recognize and appreciate what his intent was, why he wanted to share that experience with us. Um, and after that trip, my older brother and I went to live with my mom. My younger brothers lived with my dad, and we lived very different
Mm,
lifestyles. Um, and then throughout my adolescence, I kind of bounced back and forth between their homes for a variety of reasons. And so I graduated high school living with my dad, then went back and lived with my mom while going to college in Philadelphia and commuting. It was local. Um, and it was during that time that my mom became ill and over a almost 3 year period of time finally um,
mm.
succumbed to her cancer battle. That was in 1990. And
And you were how old?
I was almost 22 when she died. And I was 19 when I was home alone with her before we knew she'd have been having a number of really challenging symptoms um, and getting pretty frustrating results and non-conclusive
Mm,
information from doctors. And she ended up having a grand mal seizure,
Mm.
which I witnessed. So I saw this happen, and I got her to I called 911 and got her to the hospital and spent a whole day navigating that situation. And then learned that evening that she had 3 inoperable brain tumors.
Mm.
And meanwhile, right around the time that this took place, my dad and my brothers had all moved to Maine. So I was the only one
Mm.
home to deal with all of this. So that was a whole other complicated, traumatic time, um, that is now so long ago. So soon after my mom passed away, my brothers all moved back to Maine. They had come home to sort of be with us throughout her death and dying process. Um, and then several months later, I followed and moved to Maine, because I had fallen in love. And so I moved here, and gosh, there's so much. Um, I got some really conflicting messages from my dad. Like, I know that he always wanted the best for me. Um, and I guess I felt really pressured during the time that my mom was dying. I ended up dropping out of college. I didn't finish my bachelor's degree, and I know that my dad really wanted me to
Mm.
go back to school. Um, I remember at one time he said to me, "You should go back to college so that you can be around like-minded people and find." Said something like, "and find somebody to marry." And I was like, "Wait a second. Did you, Mr. Alternative Education, you know, radical thinker, just say to me, your only daughter, you should go to college so that you can find a husband?" And I was really struck and hurt by that.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is a really good example of the ways that he kind of just inadvertently, I believe. I know he had good intentions. He was just a little bit maybe oblivious,
Mhm.
um, in certain capacities, and also brilliant. So that was this dichotomy. It was like he was this genius, brilliant, beautiful mind, and yet he was human, and he
Yeah.
blundered, and a lot. Um, and so I didn't follow his advice, and I was also really intent on becoming a mother. Definitely in the months following my mother's passing, I was living alone in Philadelphia. I had a great job, I had a great apartment. I was kind of living the dream. I was 22 years old, newly independent, but I was fixated on motherhood. And it really consumed a lot of my thoughts and energy. There was like just this pull.
Mhm.
I don't think I knew that then, but I remember it now. And so, as I'd mentioned, well, I'd come to Maine to visit, met this young man, fell in love, and came back to Philadelphia, wrapped up my life, like gave notice at my apartment, gave notice at my job, packed up, moved to Maine to be with this person. And soon after that, that statement from my dad about going back to college, and also telling me that this person wasn't good enough for me, um, even though they were so similar. Um, I just really set my sights on and made it clear to this person, you know, I feel ready to have a baby. It's all I can think about. And he said that's what he wanted to do. So we found a beautiful little home, moved forward, made a baby, and very quickly it became clear that we were probably not going to work out and
Mm.
last as a couple. And so that proved to be true. But we hung in there for the first year of our daughter's life, and there was another really telling thing. When I told my dad I was pregnant, he was like, he did not approve, and he said, "That's a really bad idea. You're going to end up a single mom, and no man is ever going to want to be with you because you're going to be a burden."
Mm.
I was just kind of like, Lord, like, it's one thing if that's what he thought and believed, but that he said it to me
Yeah.
was pretty devastating. And
Yeah.
in fact, that was what happened. I became a single mom, and I was single for a long, long time, and mostly by choice. It's not to say that I didn't often long for a right aligned partnership,
Hmm.
but sometimes I felt like he plagued me, like he, or cursed me, I guess would be the
Mm.
word. I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, did he somehow cast this spell and make this be true? Um, so that's another example of the flavor of devastation.
Yeah, I would say that, those closest to us almost do that, because if they're deeply embedded in our psyche, then you can't unhear those things. And
Yeah.
even if you don't believe them, there is an impact. For sure. I
So
remember I was very young, so there's that. But I was 19 and dating my first husband, and it was the only time I stood up to my father, who was a minister, but he wasn't in the right. My boyfriend wasn't in the right denomination, and I was getting judgment about that. Well, he's not one of us, and so this authoritarian, narcissistic man who you just didn't cross. I stood up. The only time in my life I said, "How dare you?" He's a good person. He, listed the reasons, and it's like, and this is what I'm doing. Um, but yeah, those those
I can relate to
crossroads
that.
where they decide what's best for us, right?
Yeah. And, I think that's such a critical piece you highlighted there with the use of the word crossroads, because I feel like at each juncture in my life, at each time point in my life where I was ready to make a big life choice,
Hmm.
those were the times when I butted up against our wills, you know, butted
Hmm.
heads. So, for example, I remember shortly after my mom died, but before moving to Maine, well, so this is a tricky thing. I recently listened to a podcast episode of Glennon Doyle's We Can Do Hard Things,
Hmm.
um, where she interviewed the woman who wrote a book titled "I'm Glad My Mom Died" or something like
Hmm.
that. My mother died, which is that's a pretty loaded statement, let alone
Hmm.
book title. But I really resonated with so much of her story, and have always felt a little bit mm, hesitant to share that following my mom's death, like there had been, this almost 3 year period where thoughts of her death and dying consumed me. The
Yes.
uncertainty of it, like when, how, what's
Hmm.
it going to look like, who will I be, how will I function
Hmm.
without my mom? And then she died, and I felt this sense of liberation and freedom and lightness that I didn't anticipate, and I felt guilty about feeling. And I remember saying to my dad on the phone, gosh, all of a sudden I feel really excited and inspired to travel. I never even thought about traveling because I thought, I just imagined I'd be here for the rest of my life. This is what I know. This is where I'm going to be. And he said to me, well, you can't travel. You don't know enough about the world. And I was like, isn't that how you learn about the world?
Isn't that the point?
Right. And also, I'm like, interesting. Did you say this to your three sons who have all traveled internationally before they left? I mean, and didn't you drop out of college and hop on a Norwegian freighter when you were 17 to see the world? Like, isn't that how you learned about the world? So there was that interesting dynamic of it became more and more clear as I got older, like, okay, he definitely treats me differently
Yeah.
than my brothers. Um, so that happened. And then, soon after there was the piece about telling me that the young man I was involved with wasn't good enough for me and that I should go to college to find a husband. Um, and then, yeah, just multiple examples. Oh, when my daughter was 3, I fashioned a plan with a dear old friend who I'd met actually at that same time when I met my daughter's father when I came for that visit. And we developed a really beautiful friendship. She had moved to California with her mother and her new baby. And here I was. I have a 3.5 year old daughter, and like things are not going well. Like I'm struggling
Mhm.
to make ends meet and keep a roof over our head. And my friend and I decided, like, well, why don't I move to California and we just try to help each other out? So that's what I did, or that's what I decided. But I was met with a lot of resistance from my father and my stepmother. And I was told that I was being selfish.
Mm.
And how dare I take my child away from her family? And I was just kind of like, give me a reason to stay. Like, help me
Yeah.
make this make sense. But I want more for us. And so yeah, we really butted heads around that for a long time. I ended up moving. I just assured him, I was like, I have to try this. And
Mhm.
no matter what, like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I'll come back and I'll figure out the next step. But like I assure you, we're not going to end up living in a cardboard shelter on the street. I promise you that. And so I came back 9 months later,
Mm.
after selling everything I owned. Um, and yeah, there just continued to be
How do you feel?
complicated. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. How do you feel that impacted you? Those kind of the, well, we'll call them crossroads upon crossroads where you weren't supported.
I feel like I have a really clear answer. I feel like my dad's lack of faith in my perception of his lack of faith in me translated into lack of faith in myself.
Mhm.
So it has and sometimes continues to show up as not fully believing in my own capabilities.
Yeah.
But what I know now that I didn't know then, I just have example after example after example of times that I have leaned into uncertainty, trusted my intuition,
Mhm.
um, stood up to this male authority figure and just said, essentially, like, you're not the boss of me. Love you, and you
Yeah.
don't know better than me.
And look where you are now.
Yeah.
Like all those places where yeah, where you said you're not the boss of me. I'm going to do what I feel like is best for me. And um
Kind of, and also just like you have throughout your whole life. I mean, my dad was such a um I don't know, like almost mythical being. Like he just defied the odds in so many ways and did, march to the beat of his own drum and did big unconventional things like starting schools and starting a bakery in a rural town in Maine and growing it into this really beautiful community hub where um, folk musicians from all over the country, all over the world, really came to perform. I mean, he created a lot of really beautiful things and contributed a lot to humanity and to the communities that he touched. But I just feel like this dynamic with us of me continually having to meet the resistance from him, but that was also in me that said, like, you
Mm,
have to push back, girl. You have to show up for yourself and stand tall
mhm.
in your 5 foot, barely 5 foot tall frame. Um, but stand firm in your truth and your inner knowingness. Like, there are just so many examples of times where it was like my knowing of my truth was so big and so strong and so loud that I couldn't not listen. And I'm just kind of getting this now. Like, I know that my dad bumped up against the very same kind of resistance from his mom, and he had to
Mm,
listen to and heed the call of his inner knowing and truth,
mhm.
right, in order to do and create all that he did. And so I just think it's so interesting that he sometimes seemed so oblivious to the fact that we were having this same
Yeah,
mm, disconnect, right? Discord.
yeah.
But I feel like, Arlia, ultimately, that dynamic, that is what evolution is.
Mhm.
That's how humanity evolves. Like, it's inescapable and unavoidable that each generation is going to encounter that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And um, speaking of which, I felt this some similar liberation when my mother died, and she didn't die until just a few years ago. But having both of them gone liberated me from the belief systems that they lived in, but were still literally embodying in the sphere of my life. And so I think I know that that resistance, that discord, that tension between their values and mine, um, it was always there, and it's we can't help but internalize that. And yet, when they're gone, there's the freedom. I felt um, this spaciousness to be able to work more with those and jettison those that it was easier to let go of those that weren't me, all that was not me, even though you can't really overcome the experience of having had them as parents. But yes, it was like sharpening a knife, right? It really sharpens that sense of what is me and what is not me.
Mhm.
And yeah, in that sense, it's really useful. I remember one time my teacher, we did a movement class on resistance, and I perceived resistance as purely negative, but it's not. It's a defining, refining experience that says, "Are you sure? Is that real? Is that what you want?" That makes you have to be clear, find that clarity within yourself. And so for
I love
that,
that.
yeah.
It makes me think of how there's duality in everything, right? So, like, you're saying you previously thought of resistance as only negative, but we can flip it and instead think, like, oh, this resistance is an invitation to lean into my growth edge.
Mhm.
And why are we here if not to find and experience and expand into growth and
Yes.
our full potential?
Yeah. So let's move forward to his passing and share what you feel comfortable sharing about briefly about the actual passing and your experiences after that.
Sure. Um, so when I guess it's been like it was 2016. So when my dad was 78 years old and retired, um, without much money at all, like just pretty much scraping by, he he'd been thinking about this for a long time and planning it, but in a very haphazard way. But he packed up basically a backpack and his laptop, and I think maybe $60. And he moved to Panama. He didn't know anyone.
Wow.
Yeah. He moved to Bocas del Toro, Panama.
It's not like moving across country to California with your 3-year-old.
Right. Nothing like that. Right. Um, yeah, it was a pretty big, bold move. And that's what he always did. He did big, bold things. Um, so he up and moved his life to Panama, um, basically because he didn't want to continue to participate in the aspects of life in this country that did not align with his values. And he quickly made friends. And my dad was a poet. You've probably read some of his work that I've shared. Um, so he started a Facebook page and would share his poems every day on Facebook and developed a following. Anyway, just created this beautiful kind of idyllic life for himself in Panama. And about 2 years into his time there, he met a woman who found him through his poems on Facebook, and she was living in Panama City, and she um, moved or they went to meet each other. So she traveled to meet him in Bocas. They immediately fell in love, and she never left. And within a month of their meeting, they discovered that, and he knew he had prostate cancer before
Mm.
he moved to Panama, but he just basically said it's all under control and managed, um, and I'm fine. So we kind of trusted him,
Mm-hmm.
um, and gave him full agency over his life and health. So now it's 2 years later, and this woman is newly in her life, and she reaches out to me to say, your father is very sick, very sick.
Mm.
And that was really hard to hear. Um, but it was somehow really hard to hear from her. I was kind of like, I don't know you. And I had this total block and total resistance to receiving this information from her. And I basically was very arrogant and said, I trust my father to let us know when he needs us to know what's happening with his health and
Mm-hmm.
well-being. And it was a few months later when finally he did say, I'm very sick. Um, and it was just kind of like a wait and see, um, kind of what is he going to do? What
Mm-hmm.
choices is he going to make? Is he going to come back to the States? And my brothers and I, none of us were really in a position to kind of take him in or rescue him in any way. And also it's just like it's his life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, long story short ish, if you can even make a story like this short, um, in the fall of 2019, my husband and I traveled to go visit my dad in Panama. Um, and I definitely had a lot of trepidation around, like, oh gosh, this could be the last time I'm going to be with him. How am I around, facing his mortality? How do I feel within the context of our relationship? Um, how do I want to show up? What are my intentions around showing up for this time together? What do I hope to give? What do I hope to receive? And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed a lot about just like wanting to just show up fully grounded in love and compassion and just supporting him, hearing whatever he wanted to share. And and my daughter and her boyfriend were there. Also, they traveled at the same time, so that was really lovely. There were some challenging, I guess, energetic dynamics around this woman that my father was in relationship with. So that kind of skewed the dynamics somewhat around all of our experience of being with him,
Mm-hmm.
because there was this element of kind of having to manage her in a way, as well as manage our reactivity to her.
Mhm.
That really just, I think, interfered with my intentions of being able to just show up fully in love and compassion with him. And there came a point where, against my better judgment, I agreed that my husband and I would stay together with them in her apartment in Panama City for the final 3 nights of our stay, even though I was adamant prior to the trip, like, we're going to make our own arrangements, we're going to take care of our own accommodations. um, and he was insistent that he wanted to book a hotel for us, and he did, and it was really not suitable. And so there was just drama around the fact that we needed to make some changes and make sure to get our needs met
Mhm.
during our time there. And during those last three, or really the first of those last 3 nights that we had agreed to stay with them against my better judgment, I just got really, really triggered, like massively triggered, and I felt like a caged animal.
Mm.
I felt really suffocated, and like I just couldn't breathe. And there was like, I couldn't even mm, make sense of it. I just knew, like, got to go, got to get
Mhm.
out of here. And so when I told my dad that we were going to go stay someplace else and that we would love to spend our days together and visit and have meals, but we just needed our own personal space, he was livid, furious. So here's my dad, in his final, however long, I guess he still had another year and a half, but we didn't know that then.
Mhm.
He was raging at me, Arlia, like the kind of rage that I would see when I was a little girl, flipping out, and literally said to me, "If you leave here, I'm done with you." And I left.
Mm.
And walking down the road, as we were walking to our Uber in Panama, my husband said to me, "I finally seen your father's true colors.
Mm.
Now I know. Now I understand. I've seen firsthand what you've been trying to tell me about your relationship all of these years and how it has impacted you." Because it was terrifying.
Mhm.
It was terrifying to be in the presence of that kind of uncontrollable rage. It was terrifying to walk away,
Yeah.
but I couldn't not walk away. And so we did
I
end
I
up having,
just wanna pause there.
sure.
I couldn't not walk away. Even in the midst of that trauma, you knew what you had to do.
And really, ultimately, what I've come to understand about that moment is that that was me giving him a gift. It took
Mm.
me some time to come to that conclusion. It felt like me saving myself, which it
Mhm.
was, but it was also me saying, "I don't know when or if I'm going to see you again, but when your time comes to take your last breath, you can die knowing that your one daughter is a powerful badass
Yeah. She can
who's
take
gonna,"
care of herself,
yeah,
and she knows how.
yeah. And I
It's
think
beautiful.
ultimately how that played out is, I came home from that trip. I contacted my therapist that had been my therapist on and off for over 30 years, resumed work with her, and really kind of unpacked a lot of this stuff
Mhm.
around my dad. And when it came time for him to come home, which was a whole ordeal, as you can imagine, um, I feel like we were able to have a really, really beautiful, peaceful, loving time together. It was very soft.
What do you
Like,
attribute that to? Was it just that,
I
was
think
he
that
different? Were you different?
probably both. Um, but I really feel like that piece of me really firmly standing my ground and just saying, I love you and you do not get to bully me anymore
Mm-hmm.
was like that line in the sand for both of us that just was like, you know, this this is what we're here for. Like, I know that in your heart of hearts and in your deepest place of knowing and wisdom, you know that I get to be my own person
Mm-hmm.
and that you have to let go of the reins. And I'm asking you, I'm inviting you to do that for both of us.
Yeah. So walk us through how you were after he passed.
It's like it was very different from when my mom passed. It was just um this this time of softening. Like there was just
Mm.
such a sense of softness and peace and acceptance. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that like he was so clear and definitive about what he wanted his end of life to look like. And he would just kind of like drill that into our heads. We would have family Zooms. And, he was like, when I die, I want to come back. I'm going to come back as a willow tree, a weeping willow tree. And we were like, okay, Dad, that's really nice and poetic. What are we supposed to do with that? And he's like,
Yeah.
you're going to bury me wrapped in this shroud that I'm ordering. Um, and you're going to throw flower petals into the grave on top of me and handfuls of dirt. And you're going to cover me with dirt and you're going to plant a willow tree.
Mm.
And so we, researched and we found this green cemetery within an hour of where I live. Um, and we just made all of the arrangements per his instructions. Um, and it all just kind of like flowed seamlessly. Um, and so I think, and the way that he died was so peaceful. Like he just slipped away quietly during this 5-minute window when nobody was in the room with him,
As
which
it happens frequently.
the hospice, bereavement counselor, I think, advised us that that's very common, that sometimes the dying person will just kind of wait until a moment when nobody's present and just slip away. And so that's what happened, which was really lovely because he had the wish also of um, being given the medication that is associated with the whole death with dignity process. So we had that all in place for him. But because of the legal requirements, we had to wait until a certain day, which was
Mm.
like maybe two, I don't remember exactly how many days, but a handful of days out from when he did take his final breath. And it was a little bit stressful at the time because part of the requirements were that the hospice caregivers could not be in the room with him while he was taking the medication. They could not administer it. He needed to be able to self-administer, which he
Mm.
was not going to be capable of doing. So there was a little bit of tricky, like, how's this going to work? We
Yeah.
just don't know. Um, and then he slipped away peacefully, so it became a non-issue. Um, but really, just the time we had together, the 2 final weeks while he was back here in Maine, everyone was here. There was, you know, laughter and storytelling and sharing of memories while he was progressively slipping away and also like um what's the word I want to, he was becoming less and less lucid. He was
Mm-hmm.
definitely in this like transitory other realm,
Yeah.
which was pretty beautiful to to witness. I feel like I got a little bit off track there as far as your
It's okay.
question.
Well, let's talk about what has been your process since he's gone.
Um, really, I feel very deeply connected with him. I feel held, and I think that that's a consistency with surrounding the loss of both my parents is just um, this sense of, well, liberation from all of the energy that comes with that weight of feeling like we're bumping up against their disapproval,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just goes away, and I feel only held and only supported and only unconditionally loved and cheered on. Um, I'm trying to remember, there was something you shared um, when you were speaking about that resistance piece. And I feel like
Mm.
when when our parents transition, it's like the resistance goes away. Like we just um, no longer have to fight that inner battle. It's like the
Yeah, external
lay our
battle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I
exactly.
have, in the years since my father's passing, I had a similar experience with him. My parents were, um, well, they divorced in their 60s. And I was pretty well estranged from him from the time after they divorced. Spoke to him, saw him a couple of times, spoke to him a number of times, but he had dementia. And so his personality was changing. Um, but in his final days, his partner called and said, it's time. And I had a similar experience with him that you did when I went to say goodbye. He was he was, I'll say, transfigured. He was a different person. He was just pure. He was somewhat lucid, but he knew who I was, and um, it was extraordinary. It's extraordinary to see the ego fall away and see the purity of who they were underneath. It was very healing.
Mm.
Um, he was a musician and very judgmental, and I never felt safe performing in front of him, but I sang to him. And for the first time ever, I under I saw the color of his eyes, because we
Mm.
had never been close enough that we would, you know, look into each other's eyes. And I realized until his deathbed, I didn't know my father's eyes were blue. So it's it was, a gift, as it sounds like maybe yours was too. Those final days of peace and um, a, a shifting of the energy into just, you know pure love.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share that, but I also wanted to share that um, this similar experience that you have of that pure unconditional love once they're gone. And at first I was like, well, that's just wishful thinking, right? We're just going to sweep all the hard times under the rug, and I'm just going to feel good because he was he was as if pretending he was perfect or she was perfect. It's like, well, no, that's not it. But I've come to understand that, or to believe, understand in my own paradigm, that that I feel like they are still connected to us because of the love. I mean, that's the real, I don't want to say cord, but the positive cord that connects us. And I believe in some way we can feel them because they have entered the realm of pure consciousness, that we are now connected to that pure consciousness and love
That makes
as
so much sense.
as an ancestor. And when I began to understand that, like, okay, so it's not that I am whitewashing my experience with either of them, but I can transform my relationship with them now based on where they are now in the eternal pure consciousness realm.
Well, and to me, I think as I'm hearing you share this, like the idea of pure consciousness realm, tell me if this feels right and true for you, feels like ultimate truth, divine truth.
Yes.
And like, I think we go through life, like so much of the fears we encounter and resistance we bump up against is a response to, a reaction to this yearning to come back to a sense of our highest truth, our highest
Mm-hmm.
sense of knowing, and our most aligned self, like the self that we came into this life to be, that we
Yes.
get kind of like distracted from or taken off course from
Mm-hmm.
being. And so the sense that we now have this greater sense of awareness of this cord, like you were mentioning, that allows us to feel connected with that realm of higher consciousness in terms of how we relate with our parents now, with where they are now.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying our higher consciousness is connected to their higher consciousness because the 3D realms of ego and is not in play anymore.
So all that there is the truth and
Yeah.
knowingness of pure consciousness and pure love.
I'm going to pause here a second because there's a dog barking. Okay. I think she's done. Um, so as you, I was going to say remember him, but as you relate with him in his, oh, there she goes again. Can you hear it?
I can.
Yeah. She's a collie with a window. She's going to find something.
Of course.
Okay.
Collie, that's new for you, huh?
She's a rough collie. Well, she's my housemate's dog. She's beautiful, and she's finally, I think, out of the terrible twos. Okay, I think she's done. As you move forward after his passing, and your understanding grows, well, where is your understanding now of your relationship with him, and what are the what are the pieces of wisdom that you're finding through this process?
Mm. I feel like that's tricky to kind of like pare down. Um, I just feel really, I feel mostly peaceful, and I just feel really proud.
Mm,
Um,
proud of what?
Proud of who I am because of who he was, and how, in spite of the hard, challenging aspects of our relationship, um, how he just inspired me in so many ways, to be my authentic self as much as he resisted my authentic self,
Mhm.
because sometimes who I am could be challenging for him because it awakened maybe his fears, right? Of
Mhm.
what might or might not be for me, or what he wished for me, and his not being able to separate, let me be an autonomous self. Um, but I just, there's not a day that goes by that I don't feel um, a sense of connection with the parts of me that are who and what they are, um, because of who he was and how he influenced me. And I feel really grateful and proud of those parts. You know.
That is uh, that is beautiful. That's one of the places I resonate with. Um, he was My father was also brilliant, and I don't. Well, it was also I had a lot of work around how my mother viewed him, and so through that lens, it was it took me years to really separate her lens and say, okay, that's how she sees it. What do I see?
Mhm.
And to come to that place where after he passed and then subsequently after she passed, to truly appreciate who he was and his gifts and his brilliance, and to be able to just appreciate that and not color it with, yeah, but he was blah blah blah, you know. Eh, because a lot of those gifts were passed to me. And I think the other, well, one of my other personal realizations was how successful he was just because he lived his dreams out, not because he reached a certain level of success that my mother thought he should have or anybody else thought he should have, but that he continually listened and followed his, well, he would say God, his own guidance or his higher guidance to, this is what you do next. And
Did he continue to walk a path of like a spiritually guided path?
he did. It evolved. He was in very much in a boxed himself into most of my life into one identity. But in the last 20 years of his life, he really did 15. He he did stretch and expand and soften into his. In fact, yeah. In fact, he would say, I'm trying to remember what he told me. Oh, he talked about just being having the right, just be happy, and um, following your dreams, whatever that meant. I mean, there were some of the things he said to me in the last few years. I'm like, who are you?
Right.
Because they were almost so enlightened, even though he was still kind of his same person, but he was happy. Um, and to see him happy made me question what I had been told my whole life about who they were and who he was and who she was. So it, it was a process of peeling off the stories around him, and then after he passed, really claiming those gifts of who he was, but also who I am because of him. Because there was so much judgment around who he was and what he did, and therefore there was a lot of judgment around who he was, and because it was all lumped in together with the bad things he did, so therefore everything about him was bad.
Right.
And therefore if I inherited qualities of his, which I did, it felt like they were bad qualities. And so to be able to peel off all of those belief systems and say, yeah, he gave me gifts and they are beautiful, and he used them to his best advantage while he was alive. And so, and I can use them now. And so I'm connecting with you in the sense that um, of the two parents, I feel him most strongly.
Mm. It's interesting that you say that because as I'm sure that you've also already gleaned from some of the writing that I share, so for so much of my adulthood and coming of age, as I was raising a tiny human, um, I identified so strongly. So much of part of my story was defined, shaped, and defined by the fact that I'd lost my mother so early, and here
Mm,
I was bumbling through life, being trying to figure out how to be a mother without a mother and without having the experience of the benefit of feeling mothered by my
yeah.
mother. And I felt mothered in other ways by many other people. Um, so that was just such a big part of my story for so long. And I can't say that I feel one or the other of them with me more. I feel them both so strongly always, but just so differently. Um, and it's been so long since I lost my mom, and I didn't have the benefit of like having an adult relationship with her. So
Mhm.
I feel like in a way I don't I didn't know her. I don't know her. What I know is the way I continue to feel loved, upheld, supported, validated daily by her. Um, but I feel that in a way more so with my dad
Mhm.
because we had the years to develop a relationship for, in spite of how hard it was at times. And as you were sharing about sort of your takeaways and feelings of the ways that who you are and how you feel influenced by your dad, I'm just reminded of how my dad would, if I would reach out to him for support or wise counsel when I was going through a challenging time or conflict with someone close, um, he would always remind me that it's important for my own growth and healing to try to see the other person in light of their best qualities, highest
Mm,
attributes, rather than just focusing on their flaws or shortcomings or this one specific insult or injury. And so
mhm.
that I feel like just has helped me to expand as a being. You know, I remember my stepmother used to talk to me a lot about the importance of being compassionate towards others and the importance of having gratitude. And in the years when I was sort of in the deep, deep end of struggle and strife as a single mom and really kind of identifying with my victimhood story, I was just kind of like, it was kind of like, yeah, 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 yeah. Like, I can't hear that noise right now. I don't understand how I'm supposed to find compassion or gratitude when I'm in
Yeah.
the midst of what I'm in the midst of. But then, as the years went on, I was able to like expand more fully into finding that capacity and creating space for really feeling what it means to have compassion for others and find gratitude. But I almost feel like more than having somebody say those words to me, it's important to be grateful. It's important to have compassion for others. I had to learn it through living it and
Mhm.
feeling it. And um, I feel like it was more impactful. My dad's words were more impactful when he would say, try to focus on other people's highest good and qualities rather than their flaws and shortcomings. That just made it easier for me to almost like touch grace in that
Mm.
way that allowed me to like genuinely feel into and expand into what gratitude means and feels like and what compassion means and feels like. And so that has really been a guiding force. And then
Beautiful.
also similar but different just in his later years, I remember him saying to me, I never worry and I never hurry. And I was like, I'm gonna adopt that, Dad. That's good. Um, and that really does inform how I move through life. I
I love
really
that. Never hurry and never worry. I have a couple of thoughts on that. Carolyn Mace talks about imagining the people in front of her, particularly those with whom she has conflict, wearing a nun's habit or a
Mhm.
priest's collar, so that
Mm.
because she had a Catholic upbringing, so that it immediately brings to her mind their their inner spirit, their the respect for them as a human being and as somebody of God.
It's beautiful.
You mentioned grace. How do you define grace?
Mhm. So funny that you asked this because I was just thinking about it earlier. Several years ago, somebody invited me to share a recorded offering about my thoughts on grace because I
Mm,
often talk about this idea of space for grace. And that's a little phrase that kind of dropped into my consciousness, oh, probably 15 or so years ago during a weekend when my daughter was away with her dad and I had unscheduled time. And there was this sense of like, oh, maybe I should be or I could be doing or going or da da da
mhm,
da. But what I really need, and I tune into like my deepest place of knowing in my body and in my being, I just need rest. I just need stillness. I just need space for grace. Just need to allow myself to be, um, and to be and to feel and to be with what I feel, right? And I think so often we're just caught in this spin cycle of life of go, 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 do, produce, achieve. And that's all outside of our being.
mhm.
I'm reminded also of actually when I was about 15, saying to my mom one day, I was like, Mom, I got it. I figured it out. I'm a beer, not a doer. And I thought I was really clever because beer, BEER, was like the word beer. And so at
Oh,
15, I was kind of like, thought I was so witty and clever. And she just kind of looked at me like, yeah, she was not impressed. But it really stayed with me because so much of who I am is um, rooted in my beingness and
mm,
just staying with and returning to and finding stillness. Um, I really, really savor stillness and solitude and, and quiet. Um, and so for me, that, the more I've come to understand that about myself, that that's what I need to feel balanced and grounded and connected with self. I've actively, I don't want to say worked. I've just actively made choices progressively throughout the years that have allowed me to cultivate this this way of life that affords me a lot of spaciousness,
mhm,
um, which enables me to be with my feelings, be with my experience, and write about it and tune in, listen, um, and try to progressively let fall away the parts of myself or parts of my story that no longer fit or serve or feel burdensome. And I guess that's one way of explaining what grace feels like for me is just a returning to and staying present
mm,
with just what is.
beautiful. Is there anything else you'd like to share, particularly about your relationship with your father?
I wish that I had thought to kind of come with a prepared nugget um, about this, but um, I just feel really blessed. Um, I feel like I know enough to know that I couldn't be who I am without some of the hurdles and upheaval and angst that I've had to kind of wade through and muddle through surrounding my relationship with him. Um, but he was just he was a big spirit. Um, is a big spirit. Um, Wise and beautiful. Just really, he was just a really good, kind man, flawed, imperfect human. But I really feel like I love that until the very end, he really still held close and stayed connected with the wide eyed wonder of his childlike nature until the very end. And I think that's a really unique and beautiful quality about him.
I can see a lot of those qualities you mentioned in you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing about him.
Thank you for asking. Thank you for the invitation.
Before we go, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the work you do now so that people they have a glimpse into your personal life, but I'd love to hear about the work you do through Nourish Nurture Nest. I love
Sure.
the melding of all of your areas into one offering.
Thank you.
Say more about that.
So it's interesting. The name Nourish Nurture Nest kind of like fell into my consciousness again, like a knowing. I just sometimes hear things, and I'm like, that that stays. That's who I am. Um, and it goes back as far as like when you and I originally connected. So yeah, just I was having a conversation with somebody about the way in which I see myself moving forward in my life. And I didn't know exactly how that was all going to unfold, but without going through that whole process, here we are. Um, and then similarly, I remember in the fall of 2017, I was returning from a walk in the woods. We have this beautiful um, nature preserve right across from our home. And at the end of this walk, I just kind of put my hands up or my arms out like I often do when I'm walking. I just pray with my arms outstretched and hands kind of open to receiving, and my heart lifted and open to receiving. And I just asked, Spirit, what would you have me do? How would you have me serve? And I heard the words, you are to live and breathe and fully embody all of what Nourish Nurture Nest
Mm.
is and means for you. Just be your work, be your service. And really progressively since then, that has been what's happening. I'm just kind of moving into trusting and following the little sort of spiritual breadcrumbs for clarity and um, direction around how that unfolds. So what it looks like is I do some meal planning and preparation for private clients. I do some nutritional coaching or consulting here and there, and I do some one-on-one work with women. That really looks like just mostly, I shouldn't say just, it looks like holding space for whatever is moving through them and asking to be seen and felt and heard and honored and nurtured.
Mhm.
Um, in and then exploring ways that surrounding whatever is coming forward. They can look at integrating new ways of responding to and relating to their feelings, their stories, and incorporating practices, tools. So oftentimes it's just like inviting in some breath work, looking at just creating space in your daily movement of life to just stop and be with your breath. Um, and then, we explore nutrition if that is what is asked for or resonant for someone. Just looking at ways to cultivate a greater sense of balance and alignment to return to a sense of wholeness. Um,
I love that. That's beautiful. And it sounds so nourishing and supportive. I can't imagine that somebody wouldn't just be jumping on that for that type of support and being held and finding all the places in their life that can nourish themselves.
yeah. Sometimes it also looks like spending time with women locally or sometimes even virtually in their homes, to
Mm.
just kind of hold their hand through the process of sorting, culling, decluttering, organizing, creating functional spaces that support the way they want to feel. So it's like, let's kind of clear away. I sometimes say, let's clear away the cobwebs so you can let more light in. And when we let more light in, we're able to tap into and see and feel what's there and asking to be
Making
seen.
space for grace.
Exactly. So, really, all of my practices and all of my work come back to that. So, that's really that energy of creating space for grace is really like breathed into all of the ways I support clients, whether it's with food or decluttering or just, again, just, not just space holding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. Thank you so much. That's a real blessing for anyone. So for someone who feels called to learn more about what you do, how can they follow you or reach out to you?
You can find me on Facebook, just Julie Greenberg. Um, on Instagram, I'm not as present on Instagram, but it's mama.jewels, JEWELZZ. And my website is in progress, but not yet fully ready to go. But you can always just email me at Nourish Nurture Nest at gmail.com.
Beautiful. And stay tuned on Facebook for when there's a website.
Yes, coming
Julie,
soon.
this has been a beautiful conversation. Thank you for joining me.
It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you inviting me to be with you here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here with this conversation with Julie and I. We will be back again with another conversation. If you like these podcasts, please like and share, subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment or a review. If you have a show idea or want to chat with me, just reach out on the website, thewomenssanctuary.com, and I'll be happy to chat and would love to hear your ideas, especially if you have any feedback on this conversation about fathers and um, the journey with them through life and afterlife. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Arlia Hoffman. We'll see you here again next time on the Women's Sanctuary.